Good morning, friends. Let me turn that on. Good morning, friends. Good to be with you again this morning, this Tuesday morning. And welcome to another episode of PB Reads the Bible. Who's PB? Well, I am Pastor Brian, pastor here at Christ United Methodist Church. And I thank you for joining with me today. It is wonderful that we are able to be together in this way, together while apart. Excuse me a moment. I'm missing something here. This is another episode of PB Reads the Bible. I don't remember what episode number we would be on total. I never bothered to count those up. I suppose I could go back and see, but nope. But we are on episode 10 on our journey through the book of Samuel. Episode 10 on our journey through the book of Samuel. And this has been great. I know a number of you have been following through this book, and a number of you have been following right from the very beginning when we started this so long ago, and I thank you for that. Now, other folks might be joining us for only the first or second time or something like that. Welcome, great to have you with us as well. I'm truly humbled and appreciative of your time. I'm humbled that you would take time out of your lives to be with me in this fashion. Some of you are doing it live as I'm streaming this on Tuesday morning at 9 o'clock, while others find time at other places in the day or week to catch up on. I saw a note this morning watching Monday night, so it's great. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. I take it that it's worth your while, and that I appreciate that. I appreciate it. Go ahead and check in. I see somebody already did. Hello, Cheryl. Good to see you. Let me know you're there, that you're watching either live, or if you're watching the recording some other time, you can still check in and let me know that you watched it. And you also use that comment section for prayer requests, things you want us to keep you in prayer about, lift up or weigh down, all that kind of stuff. Also for questions or comments about what we're talking about here. Be happy to answer those questions. I try to do it as quickly as we can. Sometimes I don't see the question, it doesn't come up until after we're done. But I do go back in and look. So even if you're not watching live, you're watching some other time, you can still comment or question. I do go back in and look. I did that this morning. No questions, just a couple thank yous and stuff like that. So it's nice to know that I'm not missing anything. Our question for this week that we started yesterday is, am I a slave to dress, friends, work, or habits? Am I a slave to dress, friends, work, or habits? In other words, who or what owns us? What consumes us? Who or what do we allow to control our lives? Because if we are a slave to something, then we are not letting God control our lives, and we're not doing the things God would want us to do. Okay, we're not leaving time for God. Oh, John and Cindy checking in. Almost caught up, just need to catch yesterday's ending. Oh, great. Cool. I presume that was Cindy that said that. But good morning to both of you as well. Good morning, Marcia. Good to have you with us. Tomorrow's live stream will take place at 9 o'clock, and it will be live. As far as you're concerned, it will be live, but it will be a recording for me. I'm going to be recording it sometime today in preparation for tomorrow. I'll load it up so that it's all set to go, assuming I remember how to do that and do it properly. It'll be live tomorrow at 9 for you. I will be substituting for the prayer breakfast tomorrow. Excuse me. Sorry about that. So, and where are we? We are on. We're on 1 Samuel, chapter 10. We're picking up at verse 17, and then we're going to be reading the rest of chapter 10, obviously, and then we're also going to read chapter 11. Just because, not to try to rush to get through anything, but again, yesterday's went into chapter 10 because it finished the story. And now these next two stories are really all connected to yesterday's as well. So we're going to just do them all together. Oh, good morning, Joe. See things pop up. First Timothy site you said yesterday. Oh, the question of the week. Yes. Okay, apologies. So the question for the week is, am I a slave to dress, friends, work, or habits? And a scripture that might help you as you think about that is from First Timothy chapter 6, verses 7 through 9. First Timothy 6, 7-9. Thank you for asking that. Absolutely, we can do that. So tomorrow is live for you, recording for me. So when you see me wearing this shirt, I didn't wear the shirt 2 days in a row, just because I'm doing 2 lessons in one day. And then Thursday will be 9 o'clock, and it's just regular live stream. We will be live on Thursday. But let's get to it, shall we? So 9, 10, and 11. 9 into 10, what the reading we had yesterday. We can see these as 3 different stories about how Saul becomes king. That's how many biblical scholars view them, as 3 different stories that came from 3 different traditions, or came along with stories, but they were put together, and the editor of the book kind of spliced them in and puts a couple phrases in here and there to make them sound like they're all the same story, just different happenings. But they've been able to identify a couple of those things, and when you take those out, they become completely different stories. When last we left, Saul had been anointed to be king, leader, deliverer of Israel on behalf of God. And then he just went home. Excuse me. Apologies. So now we're going to get to the second story about Saul's becoming king, because in the first one, God had chosen him, and he just showed up, and God told Samuel, "This is the man." So here we got a different story. Samuel summoned the people to Yahweh at Mizpah and said to them, "Thus says Yahweh, the God of Israel, I brought up Israel out of Egypt, and I rescued you from the hand of the Egyptians and from the hand of all the kingdoms that were oppressing you. But today you have rejected your God, who saves you from all your calamities and your distresses. And you have said, 'No, but set a king over us.' Now, therefore, present yourselves before Yahweh by your tribes and by your clans." Pause. In yesterday's story, God seemed fine with the king, right? God said, "I have decided to give the people a king." It wasn't connected back to chapter 8 when the people demanded one. It didn't sound it. God said, "I'm going to provide the people with a king to deliver them from their enemies, and specifically from the Philistines." Now here it seems to be connecting back to chapter 8 when the people demanded one, and God warned them about it, and Samuel warned them about it, and they said, "No, set us a king. We want a king." In yesterday's reading, God had already selected a king, but here we're going to see that's not the case. It's a different way of selecting the king. Ends up being the same person, but so you can see it's a couple different stories. Because if God has already chosen Saul, as he did in yesterday's reading in chapter 9, in the beginning of 10, why does he have to go through this lottery system now, right? So it's 2 different stories about the same thing, we might say. 2 different explanations for how Saul became king. And so Samuel tells them, "All right, we're going to come up tribe by tribe before Yahweh." So it's a lottery. It's a lottery system. Samuel brought all the tribes of Israel near, and the tribe of Benjamin was taken by Lot. He brought the tribe of Benjamin near by its families, And the family of the Matrites was taken by Lot. Finally, he brought the family of the Matrites near, man by man. And Saul, the son of Kish, was taken by Lot. But when they sought him, he could not be found. Pause. So they're using this lot system. Now, we haven't read together. We haven't gone through Joshua together. But if you go through Joshua, if you read Joshua, you're going to see lots being used a couple different times in Joshua, both to find out, let's say, the bad people. In one case, it's to find out why, who did something wrong that allowed Israel lost a battle. And it was the first time they lost a battle because God was always fighting for them. And they decided that they lost this battle because somebody did something they weren't supposed to do. What it turns out is someone had taken loot from a battle, and had kept it rather than turning it over for destruction, which was a violation of the rules. And so they lost the next battle, and they used a lot system just like this one to find out who it was that was responsible. There was a second case where they also used a lot system, and I don't remember now the details of that one, but it was also to find out the perpetrator of something bad. Okay, it was the bad things. So this might be put in here now as this lottery system, as a way for an anti-monarchical, we might say, or person to point out the badness, the evilness of rejecting God and wanting a human king instead. Okay, but it's interesting that they brought the family of the Matrites near, man by man, and Saul the son of Kish was taken by Lot. But when they sought him, he could not be found. That's weird, like, especially with that language. Of course, language can be written in a couple different ways or read in a couple different ways. But as it is, we almost have this image of Saul coming up, like being picked, and then quickly running away before anybody actually sees him or identifies him, and he sneaks off somewhere. It could also be translated as, it came up man by man, and the people ask, they said, verse 22. So they inquired again of Yahweh, did the man come here? Did the man come here? But it could also be read, I believe, as are there other men to come forward, as if he hasn't come up yet. Continuing, and Yahweh said, see, he has hidden himself among the baggage. Then they ran and brought him from there. When he took his stand among the people, he was head and shoulders taller than any of them. Samuel said to all the people, do you see the one whom Yahweh has chosen? There is no one like him among all the people. And all the people shouted, long live the king. Pause. Samuel doesn't give any indication that he knows Saul. Neither does Saul give any indication that he knows Samuel. Perhaps, if we want to connect it back to the last story, perhaps it's just been a passage of time, which there must have been a passage of time. He's no longer being described as a boy. He is a man. Although he was old enough to get sent off looking for the donkeys, so he couldn't have been too terribly long, perhaps, either. But perhaps Samuel has forgotten who Saul is. But I don't think Saul would ever forget who Samuel is. But they show no idea of recognition. So another reason to think that this comes from a different tradition, and the editor tried to squeeze the two stories together. Okay. And Samuel instantly says, oh man, look at this guy. He's head and shoulders above everybody else. He's pointing out these qualifications, these qualities of Saul. Oh, and what else is interesting, backing up a little bit, in verse 22, so they inquired again of Yahweh, did the man come here? They inquired in Hebrew, the Hebrew word is Sa'al, asked of God. It's the root, it's basically Saul. So they solved looking for Saul. It's one of those word game things that we don't get, wordplay things that we don't get in English. But they sold for Saul. But the people shouted, "Long live the king!" Continuing, Samuel told the people the rights and duties of the kingship, and he wrote them in a book and laid it up before Yahweh. Then Samuel sent all the people back to their homes. Saul also went to his home at Gibeah, and with him went warriors whose hearts God had touched. But some worthless fellows said, "How can this man save us?" Pause. And yeah, worthless fellows. I think the NIV translates it as troublemakers. Both are very accurate, but it also has the connotation, the context of people who spoke against God, so to speak, or went against God. So there's a sacral. There's that sacral issue taking place at the same time. So they say that and these people, almost like not hypocrites. Anyway, the word will come to me. The word will come to me. But I'm sure I think you get the image what I'm talking about there. They're people who would go against God and speak against God. And how can this man save us? And that little word, that little line there, how can this man save us, is very poignant and pointed, and they are closer to the truth than they know. They're closer to the truth than they know. It is directly tied to the rest of 10 and chapter 11, but it's also foretelling, because and this isn't really a spoiler because we're going to read it right after this, Saul does save or deliver, because it's the same word, same deliver, save, deliver the people in this next passage. But Saul specifically says, it wasn't I, it was God using me. And he gives credit to God for God's spirit within him. But this also is like foreshadowing of Saul's failure to deliver and losing faith with God, so to speak. And then David being the one who truly saves or delivers Israel at a later time. Okay, so their question is a good question. All right, check something out here. Try not to go too far. Yes. Okay. All right, so we'll continue from there, picking up on the rest of that. They despised him. Oh, and pause a moment, because this is verse 27b. The NIV uses a short one. The NRSV, you're going to hear me read a much longer piece to this verse. That's because they use two different sources for this. The NRSV actually uses the Qumran text, in other words, a piece from the Dead Sea Scrolls that the NIV does not use. But their choice of including it, I think, is a good choice to include it, because then it makes sense with something that happens. Okay, it sort of gives a grounding background, so to speak, of something that takes place here. So continuing, they despised him and brought him no present, but he held his peace. That's the worthless fellows. No one was left of the Israelites across the Jordan whose right eye Nahash, king of the Ammonites, had not gouged out. But there were 7,000 men who had escaped from the Ammonites and had entered Jabesh Gilead. Pause. Okay, so most of that was not in, if you're following along the NIV, and some other translations too, I'm sure. Need to discuss geography here, and I should have brought up a map. Sorry, I didn't. But Jordan, most of Israel is to the west of Jordan, However, on the east side of Jordan, there are 2 or 2.5 tribes that have set up on the east of Jordan, on the western, on the east side of Jordan. So they're considered Transjordanian. If you ever hear that word, Transjordan or Transjordanian. Transjordan is across the Jordan from Israel proper. Gad, Reuben, and half the tribe of Manasseh are set up to the east of the river. And Ammon was a Canaanite kingdom also in that territory. And yeah, they had fights, they had disagreements, and there was territorial disputes between them. The Ammonites believed that the Israelites, Gad, Reuben, and half tribe of Manasseh, had stolen their land. This issue came up in Judges when we were going through Judges. It came up in there as well. Now, so Nahash is the king of Ammon, and he does this. I mean, it's brutal. He's brutal. So the NRSV puts this passage in there, I think, for 2 reasons. One, to demonstrate his brutality. I mean, gouging out people's eyes. That's just horrid. But he does it to prevent them from preventing any of them from becoming a deliverer for the people. What do you mean, Brian? What I mean is this: a person without one of their eyes is going to lack, obviously, depth perception and that the idea of being able to see things in 3 dimensions. So Nahash is limiting their sight, inhibiting their sight and that ability in order to make them poorer military leaders. Because they won't be able to see things well enough to be a good military leader, and therefore they won't be able to deliver their people, from his hand. And they will have to give in and let him take over the land and be their ruler, would be ruler over them. Okay. But some of them escaped and went to Jabesh Gilead. Aha. If you followed me in Judges, Jabesh Gilead and Gibeah in Benjamin have an interesting relationship. In the story in Judges, when the Levite's concubine was brutally raped multiple times all night long and died, and he cut up her body. And maybe she died there, maybe she died at home, maybe she died on the way, whatever. He cut up her body and sent it to all the different tribes and said, come to me. Well, the Benjaminites in Gibeah, the people of Gibeah, didn't go to fight. So after it was taken care of, they were all killed. Except for a couple of hundred men who escaped. And then Jabesh Gilead was the only community, the only tribe that stood up to protect Benjamin and said, no, we're not going to do that. And so it was their couple hundred of their virgin daughters that were taken away and given to the Benjaminites to repopulate the tribe. So we've got this close relationship between these 2 communities, Gibeah and Jabesh Gilead, to the point of relationship. Obviously, they're now related, interrelated between the 2 because of those wives and stuff like that. So that's important background here. So picking up from there, chapter 11, verse 1. About a month later, Nahash the Ammonite went up and besieged Jabesh Gilead. And all the men of Jabesh said to Nahash, make a treaty with us, and we will serve you. But Nahash the Ammonite said to them, on this condition I will make a treaty with you, namely, that I gouge everyone's right eye, and thus put disgrace upon all Israel. The elders of Jabesh Gilead said to him, give us 7 days respite, that we may send messengers through all the territory of Israel. Then, if there is no one to save us, there's that word again. We will give ourselves up to you. When the messengers came, pause. There's no answer from Nahash. There's no recorded answer from Nahash. We presume that he was so confident in himself and in his people, his men, his military prowess that, fine, I'll give them the 7 days. Nobody's going to come. And even if they do, we're going to beat them just like we always do. Right? So continuing, when the messengers came to Gibeah of Saul, they reported the matter in the hearing of the people, and all the people wept aloud. Pause. So they sent messengers all over the place. We're not told if nobody else seems to have reacted to this and wanted to help, but Gibeah, the people react. This is because of that relationship between these two communities. Now Saul was coming from the field behind the oxen. In other words, he was working in the field just like an ordinary citizen. So we're not seeing kingship. This is why a lot of scholars see this as a third telling of how Saul becomes king. So like three different traditions that are then brought together. Repeating, verse 5. Now Saul was coming from the field behind the oxen, and Saul said, "What is the matter with the people that they are weeping?" So they told him the message from the inhabitants of Jabesh. And the Spirit of God came upon Saul in power when he heard these words, and his anger was greatly kindled. He took a yoke of oxen and cut them in pieces and sent them throughout all the territory of Israel by messengers, saying, "Whoever does not come out after Saul and Samuel, so shall it be done to his oxen." Pause. So Saul hears the message, and two things happen at the same time. Saul becomes greatly angered, and the Spirit of God descends upon him. Again, another reason of reading this as a third story. The Spirit of God had descended upon Saul was given to Saul a couple chapters ago. But now it seems like he had lost the Spirit of God, or he doesn't have it. That's why, think of it as a different story. But now God gives him the Spirit, perhaps for the first time, perhaps again. Why again? Don't know. Because once the Spirit, you should always have it. And two different responses, two different reactions to the Spirit. In the first one, when he receives the Spirit, he goes into that prophetic frenzy. But here, the Spirit seems to give him all kind of power and strength and leadership abilities. So we're going to see all that. And what does he do? He cuts his oxen up into a whole bunch of pieces and sends them out. Does that sound familiar? If you followed Judges, and even if you didn't, I just said something about it a little while ago. Just like that story about the Levite, how he had done that with his concubine. But Saul does it here with oxen. And whoever does not come out, he's promising, we're going to come after you and punish you in some way. For instance, by cutting up your oxen. Now, he does say after Saul and Samuel, which is interesting because Samuel has not appeared at all in this. That's the first mention of Samuel. That seems to be the Deuteronomistic writer trying to insert the power of the prophet into this story. Continuing, then the dread of Yahweh fell upon the people, and they came out as one. When he mustered them at Bezek, those from Israel were 300,000, and those from Judah 70,000. Pause. What's the difference between Israel and Judah? Israel, and at this time, of course, they're all just tribes. They're all just tribes. But Israel is usually what is referred to as the northern kingdom, and Judah is how they usually refer to as the southern section of the land, of the territory. I shouldn't have said northern kingdom, the northern section of the land and the southern section of the land. Under David, when they become one nation, it's the whole thing is Israel. And under Solomon, after Solomon dies and Rehoboam and Jeroboam take over, it becomes two different countries. The northern kingdom is Israel and the southern kingdom is Judah. But they kind of called them that before they became one nation. 300,000 and 70,000. The 70 can also be read as 30 for some reason. But again, thinking back a few chapters, 5 or 6 chapters, we remember that 1,000 doesn't necessarily mean 1,000. Thousands or is just a military complement. It could be as little as 10 or 20 in a contingent. So which makes is far more likely. They didn't send 330,000 or 370,000 men out to fight. It was probably, if it was, it's probably only a couple thousand that of our thousands that actually went out to fight. Continuing, they said to the messengers who had come, these would be the messengers from Jabesh Gilead, thus shall you say to the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead, tomorrow, by the time the sun is hot, you shall have deliverance. Pause. There's that word. How can this man save us? By the worthless men, the people of Jabesh Gilead, asking for someone, saying, unless no one can save us. Saul now saying, but this time tomorrow you will be saved, have deliverance, because save and deliverance are the same word. When the messengers came and told the inhabitants of Jabesh, they rejoiced. So the inhabitants of Jabesh said to Nahash, tomorrow we will give ourselves up to you, and you may do to us whatever seems good to you. Pause. The English loses the wordplay on this. This is an intentionally ambiguous statement. This is an intentionally ambiguous statement, and both the NIV and the NRSV, and I'm going to assume or presume most, if not all, of the other translations miss the wordplay. Because give ourselves up to, it literally means come out to you, which can mean come out to surrender and give ourselves up to you, but it also can mean come out to do battle with you. It's intentionally ambiguous as to which they were saying. Nahash obviously read it as one way, saying that, they're going to give themselves up tomorrow. But presumably they meant tomorrow we're going to come out to you along with all of our friends from all these other places. So continuing, verse 11. The next day, Saul put the people in 3 companies. Good military leader. At the morning watch, they came into the camp and cut down the Ammonites until the heat of the day. And those who survived were scattered, so that no 2 of them were left together. Pause. So Saul is not a military person. We see in this story that he's not a military person. He's a farmer. He was out working in his field. Now all of a sudden he's a military genius. And he divides his company into 3 to attack a camp, which again points to the fact that it's nowhere near as large of troops as they're talking here, because the Ammonites only have 1 camp, presumably with hundreds of thousands of people now. But so he divides it to have this wonderful attack. Again, showing it's not him. It's not him. It's the power of the Spirit of God teaching him and showing him and telling him what to do. The people said to Samuel, who is it that said, shall Saul reign over us? Give them to us so that we may put them to death. Pause. Now, presumably we're talking about the worthless fellows. The worthless fellows here, which again, this is probably a combination of a couple different stories coming together, because in this story, nobody's actually said that. They said it in the prior story. But they want them to be put to death. Let me finish this though. But Saul said, no one shall be put to death this day, for today Yahweh has brought deliverance to Israel. Pause. Excuse me. Oh, excuse me. Sorry about that. So the people say, bring them to us. They should be put. We're going to put them to death. Sounds like petty vengeance. Sounds like petty vengeance. And if you follow Judges, we have experience with petty vengeance in the book of Judges. So this seems to be connecting us back to the judges, because certainly this whole story for Saul sounds like it could be a story from the judges, with the falling of the Spirit, the military deliverance against a stronger army. This sounds like a story from the book of Judges. Of course, we know it's not. We know it's different because of the other things that have taken place. And Saul says, no, we're not going to do that. And so it sounds like Saul is being very magnanimous and beneficent to the people, very kingly, we might say, not taking things personal or holding grudges. But there's keys in the wording. Remember, these people were considered to be worthless fellows, troublemakers, but literally they were people that spoke against God. Okay, slanderers. That's the word I was trying to think of before. Slanderers of Yahweh. So it's a sacral thing. The rules that they violated were most definitely, based on the law, worthy of execution. So these people seem to be wanting to carry out religious justice, sacral justice, because of these people and removing them from us. Saul is now taking over, and that was a job that, notice, they went to Samuel. The people said to Samuel. Samuel doesn't give them the answer, presumably, I would say presumably, because Saul didn't let him. Saul spoke up much faster and said, no one's going to be put to death today. Because why? Because Yahweh has given us deliverance this day. It's nothing to do with me, people. And we're doing this to celebrate God, is what he's saying. We can't execute somebody on a day like today because God, Yahweh, our God, has given us deliverance. Continuing, Samuel said to the people, and this part seems to be an insertion from a later editor. Samuel said to the people, come, let us go up to Gilgal and there renew the kingship. That seems to be an insertion by somebody to try to put Samuel, like the D writer, the Deuteronomistic writer, to insert Samuel back into the story and back into the importance of kingship and the establishment of the king. But if we take that verse out, so all the people went to Gilgal, and there they made Saul king before Yahweh in Gilgal. There they sacrificed offerings of well-being before Yahweh, and there Saul and all the Israelites rejoiced greatly. Pause. End of chapter 11. So that last story and that last piece there makes it sound like the people are choosing Saul to be their king. The first part of the story, let's look at them as three different stories. The first story, we have God picking Saul and telling Samuel he's the man. In the second one, we have it taking place by a lottery system, and it ended up being Saul. But now in this third one, the people choose Saul to be the king because he led them in this battle and in delivering the people from the hands of the Ammonites. In the hands of the Ammonites, and they chose Saul. They picked it. They raised him as king before Yahweh. Interesting wording. Well, my friends, that's it for today. I do pray that this has been beneficial to you, that you've learned something or relearned something in what we've said and read today, that God has spoken to you in some way. Now, as you go about your days, not just today, but every day, keep those eyes and ears, both physical and spiritual, open to everything that God is doing in your life and in the lives of those around you, because our God is a living, loving, active God. When you see it, when you hear it, say, thank you, Papa, and then tell somebody about it. Until we meet again, my friends, be blessed.